I am Benjamin Bryant from Bryant McKinnon Lawyers, and this is Heather McKinnon from Bryant McKinnon Lawyers. How are you doing, Heather?
Hi, Ben. I hope your cold gets better soon.
I'm praying to get better soon. But everyone else has it. Like, it's crazy. It's a crazy season. But we are here to talk about, you can grace of your screens. We're here to talk about episode 45 of our podcast, The Family Matters Show, in which we talk about the top 6 questions that we get in respect to property settlements. Now, we've done quite a few podcast episodes on property settlements, but it's these questions that we keep getting over and over and over again. And we found that people love asking the same questions, and we found that people love hearing the podcast on the property settlement questions. So we are going to delve straight back into that again to give people what they want. And the top 6 questions, Heather, we covered a lot of field, and we're going to do 3 questions now. One of them was about the timing to do a property settlement, because of course you have when it's appropriate to do the property settlement, when you're emotionally able and available to do the property settlement, versus when the court's going to make you do a property settlement by. So what did we speak about with that?
Yeah, we talked about, don't start it in the throes of that original grief reaction in that first couple of months, but also don't leave it until you end up getting served with court process, 2 years after you've separated. I think you talk about a case where someone came back nearly 20 years later. So It's all about making sure you've got a clear understanding of when's appropriate and when to start.
It was interesting, that one, Heather, actually. That just reminded me, they were still married. It was a couple that they'd been separated for so long, but they were still married. Yeah. So, yeah, interesting. Make sure you see a lawyer about the timing, and don't go and see a lawyer a week before the applicable date expires, because that's very frustrating. The other issues that we discussed, Heather, we went through the essentially 3 steps the court does: identify the assets and the liabilities of the parties, figure out the contributions, so how the assets got there, looking back in time, and then looking into the future. Step 3, what are the future needs like for each party? We've discussed this in so many episodes, and I think episode 2 comes to mind, like right from the start. We've been talking about property settlement, and we went through those issues, but we spent a lot of time actually on step 1, identifying what the assets and liabilities are, which a lot of people think that's pretty basic, it's pretty straightforward, like a balance sheet, and in some circumstances it really is straightforward. And you're not talking about what is up for grabs, you're talking about how it got there, who did what, and how it needs to be divided. But in a lot of occasions, we can't get off step 1. We can't find out what the assets are or the liabilities are of the parties, and certain things need to happen.
Yeah, and we talk about the role of that step 1. How do you get documents that help piece the puzzle together, particularly if one person doesn't have any idea and it hasn't been their role in the relationship.
Yeah, and which is not uncommon. As we get both sets of clients. We get the clients that come in with the folders of information or the Excel spreadsheet. That's when I start freaking out. And we get the other people that don't know. They actually don't know the answer to the question. They don't know what the house is worth. They don't know what is in the other party's super. So we see all sorts. And Hannah, also, we finished the podcast, I think, on when to see a lawyer, or perhaps when you don't need to see a lawyer, because a lot of people do, the hands-on-heart deals. We don't need to pay the lawyers; they're just after the money. And we go into when it might be appropriate not to get a lawyer, and when it's certainly appropriate or essential that you do get a lawyer.
Yeah, and those timing things are really important, because otherwise you can be shocked about, I didn't know that I should have done that. So we talk about examples of when you try and do it yourselves, but certainly I've always been a real advocate of have a go. If you're young and you've got a simple case, then the Family Court website does give you guidance on how you might try and do it yourself.
That's right. And also there's a difference between legal representation and legal advice. So even if you're not going to get legal representation or get them to draw up anything, at least get the legal advice so you know what your entitlement is and what you're walking away from. Yep. Essentially, that's what we'll say. I think that's a pretty good wrap-up of episode 45, the top 6 questions in property settlements. You can check that out at bryantmckinnon.com.au or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, thanks, guys.